TFT Set 8 is coming to a close with the mid-set PBE right around the corner, and from playing it for the past few months I've realised that this set had the potential and setup to be one of the best TFT sets ever, but it clearly isn't. So in this video I'll go over the reasons why Set 8 could have been the best set ever, and at the end I'll go over why it just didn't happen. Firstly, we start with the theme of this set: superheroes.
I should get a suit.
Obviously, superheroes have been a common and popular genre in movies and comics, but now we can see it through the lens of League of Legends.
Let's bounce.
For TFT, it's very unique because it's one of the few sci-fi sets we've ever had, and historically those sci-fi sets have been the best sets ever. Now, the main reason isn't that there are superheroes, but it's the execution of the superhero theme. Every single unit fits into this theme incredibly well, and these units definitely suit their traits. The cinematics and comics they released expanded this world, added some fun stories, and made it much cooler. Visually, this set is very colourful, diverse, and vibrant compared to previous sets, especially some of the boards released for this set. And I'm expecting the theme to be even better in the mid-set when they explore the Void theme more. And this set brings design choices with it that will vastly change the future of TFT. Firstly, I'll mention Urgot, who has some of the best design for any unit in the history of TFT. Nami would have actually been better to include in this set rather than Urgot, as Nami's abilities and particularly her ults are much more thematically suitable for this set. And that's because massive tidal waves and tsunamis are a pretty common disaster in sci-fi films. But Nami doesn't have any suitable superhero skins for this set. So they added Nami's ult to Urgot's Crab God skin, which fits it perfectly. So even when the devs are limited by the skin lines, they can still make it work and make the excellent unit that is Urgot. Anyway, another amazing design choice is some units breaking away from the standard roles in League. For example, for the first time ever, Leona is a damage carry and not a tank. Likewise, there are more units like Yasuo and Soraka that are AP carries rather than being AD or supportive like they usually are. Now this is massive because TFT has taken the stance of potentially changing the identities of League characters to suit a TFT set, which will be very impactful going forward, especially to preserve the uniqueness of a set. Especially after Set 7 with Dragons having the worst comp diversity and flexibility in the history of TFT, Set 8 brings threats to the table, which are infinitely more flexible and are some of the most splashable units ever in TFT. Even the best comps from the best meta website can and will still vary from game to game, and this does wonders for the replayability and enjoyment of the set because it doesn't get dull and boring nearly as quickly.
And to add on to that, threats solve like a problem on your board where, you know, sometimes you need anti-heal, you don't have it, you can put in Aurelion Soul, sometimes you want to CC their major carry. The entire board on the enemy team is just Jax, you know, and so you put in a Vel'Koz and just constantly CC that unit. Kind of all of these things solve a different problem for your board, and having that kind of flexibility is really fun and something we wanted to give everyone a chance to play with and try, and then we can see how everyone reacts to that.
I also think that hero augments are a massive reason why this set could have been the best set ever. I say this because hero augments should have fulfilled every single TFT player's fantasy, which is making literally any unit a viable and strong carry. And hero augments allow the cheaper units to still be very strong in the late game and not just be outscaled by any 4 or 5 cost unit. Hero augments also replaced trait-related augments, which were great to get and to play because they're so impactful, but that's if you hit them. It was always disappointing to not get offered those rare augments that have a big and fun impact on the trait you're playing. But now you'll always be able to get an augment that can impact your board regardless of the traits you're investing in, because the individual unit is all you care about playing. It's far easier to play this single unit than potentially pivot your board and invest into another trait. With 4 hero augment rerolls, you can consider many different heroes, which gives you a lot of choice and can be a lot of fun. Likewise, all the 5 costs are a fun experience to play, as individually they all feel great. Unlike Set 7 with dragons like Asol and Ao Shin, who overlapped very heavily. You would often ask, why would you play Asol when you could play Ao Shin? Pyke was also awkward to play and never really found his place in Set 7, but that just isn't true for Set 8. All the 5 costs perform distinct roles in their respective boards, and they are all great to play. Set 8 also brought a lot of significant system changes. For example, dodge chance has been removed from sparring glove and items it makes. Dodge was a massive issue that plagued TFT, as AD carries could have their high mana cost ult completely dodged by a single component. Even just 5% dodge chance was insane, as it could do far too much, and it's finally gone. This change removed a lot of frustration and brought consistency across the board between AP and AD carries. Anyway, remember Cho'Gath back in set 6? And how everyone wanted to know how many stacks their Cho'Gath had? Well, now finally in set 8 we have stat trackers that can tell you things like that, like how many anima stacks you have, how much damage bonus you've earned, and how much damage you've dealt through the trait. This set also has a much better approach to traits. For example, Mech Prime is the best iteration of the All for One trait so far. The previous version, Dragonmancer, felt like there was little to no trade-off, because even though other Dragonmancers didn't get bonuses, you still have these powerful units on your board. With Mech Prime, there is always a trade-off, but if you invest in it more, then the trade-off is mitigated. And there exists a very easy unit to play that counters the trait, which is Vel'Koz, but he doesn't render Mech useless. Likewise, this iteration of Brawler is the best ever as it scales max HP, including items equipped. This means that early 4 Brawler won't be nearly as insane as it was before, and later when you've invested more into it, Brawlers will be much stronger. Also, this set doesn't have any assassins, but there is still backline access with Hacker, and you can choose which unit has that access. This feels a lot better to play and to play against, as there's much more control in the player's hands. And since Aegis and Defender grant MR and armor to your entire team, they feel great to play, especially when you're countering another player, because even your carry becomes tankier against that type of damage. This also makes the shred items feel a lot better because they're always useful, even against the squishier units, and you will never feel bad making them. Speaking of items, with the removal of Banshee's Claw and minor adjustments across the board, the item state is the best it ever has been in TFT, and I covered it in depth in this video. For example, IE and JG no longer feel so heavily tied together. In fact, building them together is rarely a good combination anymore. And there are extra stat bonuses to Zephyr, Shroud and Quicksilver, so these items feel less bad to build and are more beneficial to a unit because of the extra stat bonuses. The introduction of item anvils also solved a big issue where you could get completely useless items on PvE rounds, which would put you significantly behind your opponents and could even cost you the game. Another thing to note is that this set steered away from augments and traits that give sustained Econ throughout the game. Trip Econ was far too reliable and powerful to snowball your Econ, and it was too easy to recover Econ through it. It's definitely noticeable that it's gone. Compare Underground to Shimmer Scale. You can lose a lot of HP with Underground and you don't get any Econ until you cash out, whereas Shimmer Scale always gave gold regardless if you won or lost, and that would easily put you way ahead of other players in the lobby. Another experience with insane momentum and Econ was Fortune's Favour, a new game mode that was loads of fun because of the amount of items, gold and tomes of traits you got. You could pull off some really insane boards in a short amount of time and it was incredibly fun. I even think that this game mode was the first step Riot took in replacing Hyperroll, and I explain why here. Anyway, with all these reasons, why is this set not as great as it should have been? Well, I think there's 3 main reasons. Firstly, there was just too much time in between patches. Set 8 launched on the 7th of December, and because of the holidays, there was a long gap between the launch patch and 13.1. While the B patch did address a lot of problems, there were still standout issues like mascots, supers and jacks. Of course, once the holidays were over, 13.1 was released that nerfed these issues, but because they were problematic for such a long time, they were nerfed extra hard to avoid player frustration. Comps that were very strong in 12.23 were almost unplayable in 13.1, which caused a massive swing in the strength and viability of a lot of comps. And because of the breach at Riot Games, 13.2 was skipped and instead we had a C patch. And we didn't see the trait reworks like for Gadgettine and Laser Core, so they were underpowered for longer. 13.3 finally brought in those reworks and the 4 hero augment reroll, but some units continued to struggle like Tilia, and this was quite late into the set. In my opinion, 13.4 was the patch that finally brought the set together because a lot of comps were finally playable, and it brought some much needed nerfs to things like Hextech Gunblade, High-End Shopping, Urgot and Sure Shot. But this was on the 23rd of February, 2.5 months into the set, and that is incredibly late considering how close the mid-set is. Set 8 is one of the most ambitious sets of all time, with the sheer amount of units, threats, and the most augments we've ever seen in a TFT set. I just think you can't really afford such large gaps in between patches with such an ambitious set. Things can go awry so easily with such a complicated set, and indeed we saw that numerous times with Yuumi, Jax, and Set. 13.1c was even briefly reverted for some reason, undoing some of the nerfs and bringing back the curse of Set. And look, there's no fault to be had here, it's just really unfortunate that the timing around the patches was messed up due to holidays and the breach. Another massive issue is items and their distribution. The variance between how many components players could get at Wolves could wildly vary, and after Wolves some players can have 8 components whilst others can have as much as 12. So especially with some comps spiking in board strength at stage 4 and level 7, you'll be punished extremely heavily for something that was completely out of your control. Being 2 full items down is an insanely massive power gap, and it's not something you can really play around as there frankly aren't many, if any, options at your disposal. In some games you can lose 20 to 30 HP in stage 4 and there'd be nothing you can do about it. And the third major reason are the bugs. There were a lot of bugs with units, traits, items and augments in this set that would potentially lose you the game and just be frustrating to deal with. For example, there were bugs with Samira where her ult fizzles or just doesn't ricochet. There were also bugs with augments like Elastic Sling where it just won't fling some units, and there were a lot of targeting issues. But it didn't stop there. The client was very buggy for a while where post-game you would only be able to see a single player and the only thing you could do was relaunch your entire client. These issues add up and made playing the set a lot more frustrating than usual. Like the changes to player damage which made low rolling feel absolutely awful. You're already in a bad spot with items, augments or units, and to add to that, you're punished even more harshly by how much HP you're losing. The game is piling onto you when you're already getting piled on by bad luck. And some trades caused a lot of frustration, like Ox-Force with its invulnerability that could lead to weird interactions like blocking entire ults or shielding or healing instead of dying, which just isn't fun to play against. Also, hero augments were an issue throughout the set, because in the case that a hero augment was slightly overtuned, comps with that hero in it suddenly perform much better, and likewise if the hero augment is undertuned, then comps with that hero will suffer. So comp viability can swing depending on augment balance. Especially after the 4 hero augment rerolls, augment balance became really important to get right in this set. A lot of these issues were addressed in 13.4 and 13.5, like player damage slightly decreasing, reworked item distribution, and bug fixes. Honestly, 13.4 and 13.5 were amazing patches, but it was a little too late. However, these solutions and fixes will be carried over to the mid-set, so I think that as long as we don't get massive gaps in the patch cycle, then the mid-set is going to be far better than Set 8. But let me know what you think. Are there more reasons why Set 8 is so great? Or did I miss a massive problem in this set? Leave a comment and remember to subscribe. Anyway, if you want to see more from me, then check out why the Gadget Team rework isn't quite enough, or check out what champions I think will be in Set 9. As always, thank you for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.